This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. I have a wonderful friend of mine who was recently here visiting with me in the U.S., but he's an international business leader, Pete Henderson, who is the founder and CEO of E2G Food. Pete, welcome.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to join you. Thanks for the invite.
Now, your bio is pretty long, so I won't review it as a lead, and I'll have you talk about it, but what you've done around the world from a business perspective is pretty amazing. Now, I hear that you are where? You're in Dubai? Is that what I hear? Currently?
Yes, I'm in Dubai. I was in Texas last week, London yesterday, and Dubai last night. And the amazing thing about Dubai, it's a little bit like Texas. Everybody here is so positive. They're just driving businesses. They're getting together. They're taking over the world. And that's part of the reason we in Dubai right now is because we would like to help save the world with our new product.
Well, and I'd love to talk about your new product, and I want to get into your business career so you can tell us all about it. But Dubai is a fascinating place. It's the hub for a lot of business and development and innovation. Tell me what you found in Dubai. This wasn't on our items to talk about, but I'm amazed at your interest in Dubai.
Well, I'll sort of give away a little bit of my age in this call, because on the 2nd of August, 1990, I received a phone call from CNN Atlanta desk, a chap called Steve Cassidy. And he said, Peter, get to Kuwait as quickly as you can because Saddam Hussein has invaded Kuwait.
Oh, wow.
And so I figured, well, let's go to Kuwait. And well, we couldn't quite get there because the runway was bombed and there was a war going on. And I was an international news cameraman at the time. So we chartered a plane from Jordan and we flew to where we thought we might be able to land in Bahrain, and they said they didn't want us, so we landed in Dubai. And there are literally 3 airports. There was the airport hotel, the Sheraton, and the Hilton, and that was it. And the highlight was we could drive up the road into the desert and go to the Hard Rock Cafe.
Now, that's interesting, Pete. I've not heard that story before. So where everyone was trying to flee harm and disaster and destruction, you were running towards the bombs.
Well, that's been the nature of about 15 years of my life as an international news cameraman, was that when everybody was running away, we were running towards it. In fact, it was a real privilege. We were witnessing history unfolding in front of us on a daily basis. So it was an amazing opportunity to have a front seat of life and watch, international events unfolding in front of you.
And again, this wasn't designed to be part of our discussion, but I grew up in a military area. And I have to tell you that I commend those service members that serve in the militaries from the U.S. and around the globe who are running towards harm's way, as well as our first responders, police officers and the like, that are running towards harm to try to help someone else. And the cameraman and the news team is doing much the same.
Well, especially a cameraman, because you have to be at the pointy end to get the picture, right?
Right.
You can't sit in your hotel room with a notebook and a pen and write about it, or if you're a radio correspondent, talk about it. If you don't get the pictures, you don't get the story. So it did mean that we had to be on the ground, but it was a privilege at the same time. And, I just want to mention that although it was the most fascinating journey as a news cameraman, I think the business behind being a news cameraman was also fascinating.
Right.
Because first of all, I wasn't the best cameraman, but I managed to get to places nobody else got to. So I often got the shots nobody else did. But quite early on in my life, I asked the NBC bureau chief from Burbank, Heather Allen, I said, Heather, how much do you pay a cameraman? She said, we'll give you $250 a day. Plus $75 for your food and grub, and we'll give you a camera. So I said, okay, that's a lot of money. I said, well, if I had my own camera, how much would you give me then? She said, we'd pay you $500 for your camera, so you'd get $750 plus your per diem. I thought, wow, how much is a camera? That's like $50,000 camera. That means it's earning like 1% of its value every day. I'm going to buy a camera. So I bought a camera and I suddenly discovered that this was a pretty cool business because the camera was earning twice as much as me and never got scared. And it could go anywhere. So
Yeah, good. You had a long business in news, but let me ask you this before we get to your career. It sounds like you purchased your first camera and you just started out in building your business. But you mentioned that you weren't that great at it, but yet you decided to do it. And if you don't mind, tell our listener why that makes sense. So you weren't very good at it, you decided to stay with it, and you ended up doing well. How did you become a cameraman to begin with?
So I sort of fell into by default. My family was in the film industry, and my sister was a props assistant, my other brother a production manager, and I got a job as a T-boy on the film set. And then I became a production manager, and I thought the camera work looked quite cool. And then I got I filmed a riot in South Africa, actually, at a university in Cape Town.
Oh, wow.
And I took the pictures to the BBC. And they said, where were these? And I said, it was in Cape Town. And they said, well, we'll rush off there. And I said, no, buy my pictures. And they rushed off. And then while they were in Cape Town, I filmed some in Johannesburg, another city. And by the time they got back, the correspondent said, I think you better come work for us. Oh, wow. So I got a job basically out of spontaneity and filming riots. And it was the end of the apartheid era. So it was a pretty hectic time in South Africa.
How old were you at the time?
I was 22, 23.
Okay.
But you know what was interesting? I was brought up in a white South Africa, in a privileged, educated part of this country, where, in fact, you know, they had apartheid. So there was separate living, separate marriages. It was a complete segregation. So the first time I went into Soweto and met people that I'd never met in my life before, this was like absolutely, you know, mind-blowing to me, because I realized that in my own country were fellow South Africans who basically were miles apart from each other. So it was a fantastic learning curve as a young 22-year-old to basically anticipate what one man, one vote would be like in a Rainbow Nation. So apart from being a cameraman and being a journalist, it was the excitement of basically seeing my own country go from apartheid to having one man, one vote and becoming the Rainbow Nation, with Nelson Mandela being released eventually.
What a historic transition for the country. I had a chance to meet Winnie Mandela many years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah. So it's you were a person that viewed a lot of history, from what you just described to what happened in Kuwait that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So talk me through your transition. So you purchased a camera, you figured out the math, and you thought, I can get into this business as a business owner.
So in fact, I didn't really have enough money to buy my first camera, because $50,000 was more than a house in South Africa. So I went to the bank and I said, can I borrow some money? And they said, sure, you're going to buy a house. I said, no, I'm going to buy a camera and take it into Soweto. They said, what? You're crazy. I'm not going to lend you like 50 grand to go and take. Sorry, it's going to get burnt and stolen. So Heather Allen, who was the NBC bureau chief, she said, Pete, I'll lend you $50,000.
Oh, wow.
I said, Heather, I don't even know you. She said, I believe in you. Just go and buy the camera, hop on a plane, go to London, go to Sony. And Rachel in the NBC office in London's got my checkbook. She'll write you a check for 50 grand. Be back on the weekend because you're covering a funeral in Port Elizabeth. So I grabbed the opportunity, and for 6 months, I didn't do any partying, didn't buy anything at all. Every paycheck I got, I gave back to her straight away.
Oh, my.
And at the end of like 9 months, I paid back the camera, I think. And I said to Heather, I said, wow, you know, I paid back the camera. What's the interest? How much do I owe you? And she looked at me and said, you don't owe me a cent. I said, what do you mean? She said, just help somebody else one day.
Right.
And that was a really good lesson in business and in life, that, you know, sometimes you have to give people a break.
You do.
And then if they behave well, they're going to help other people later on. And so throughout my life since then, whenever I've had the opportunity to give somebody a break in business, I've taken on the same lessons that were given to me when I was a young guy.
It's interesting. I speak to people often, especially business leaders, about the idea of paying it forward, you know, as a basic premise. So you have someone to help you and you turn around and you help someone else. And sometimes people become a little closed off. They get help and then they don't return the favor. And so what you've done is just incredible, at the idea of paying it forward to other business leaders.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the world. You can't just take. You need to give back or invest. Otherwise it won't work.
So tell me what happened with that business. It looks like you've been in the telecom and the media space for a while and grew several businesses and sold them. Walk us through that journey. So you have a camera, you paid it back in 9 months, and then what happened?
Then I flew to London to go and work in London and didn't like the weather. So I looked at the map and thought, there's a warm, fun sunny and interesting. And I landed up in Cyprus, a Mediterranean island in the Middle East, at just about the time when John Anderson and hostages from the US and the UK started being released from captivity in Syria and Lebanon. So with my camera, everybody called me on the same day, so I quickly bought another camera, and then another one, and then another one. Before I knew it, I had 12 cameras.
Oh, wow. 12 $50,000 cameras, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was working pretty well, because in Cyprus, you weren't allowed to be in debt if you were a foreigner. If you were a visiting foreigner, you could live there, but one of the rules were you couldn't accumulate debt in that particular time when I lived there. But they only charged you 4.25% corporation tax. So it was a great incentive to start a company. So I had mostly Australians who were really good operators working for me. And they didn't annoy anybody. They would go anywhere. So they were in Baghdad. They were in Mogadishu for Black Hawk Down. They were in Sarajevo. They were Chechnya. I mean, every conflict, the Berlin Wall coming down, the Ayatollah Khomeini's funeral, we covered all of those. And then one day, when Kuwait was invaded at that same period, we were the first camera crew to get to the American embassy in Kuwait City, and we filmed the American flag going up the flagpole. And I thought, wow, these are such valuable photographs. We could sell these all around the world 10 times over. That, you know, Kuwait's been retaken, the Americans have gone back into the embassy, and this is going to be phenomenal. But we couldn't send them anywhere. We were stuck in the middle of the desert with incredibly valuable pictures. So after the Gulf War, we said, we need to be able to transmit these pictures from location, like live.
Right.
So my wife was delighted, thinking we'd get some new curtains in the living room suite, when suddenly I said, we're going to buy a satellite dish. And she said, what the hell's that? I said, I don't really know, but it's 12 boxes and it's going to cost me $1.2 million.
So don't lose your thought on that real quick, because I think it's important for people to know in 2024, 2025 coming up, that back in the 90s, you couldn't just take a picture from a cell phone and send it to everybody in the world, or you couldn't send it through social media. This was a different time era. So the idea of you buying a satellite, which was still relatively, it was around, but it wasn't as commonplace. It was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal, and no individuals had them. You know, maybe a few CBS News and people had them, but there weren't any privately owned transmitters, as it were, because the power of the transmitter then in those days was the network.
Right.
So the idea of somebody being able to go on location and start transmitting live over satellite was quite unique. But I did cancel the order because I was so worried about it, and then I reinstated it, and then I canceled, and then I reinstated it. And I thought, you know what? I'm 27. I've got a couple of $1 million in the bank. I could just go to the beach and chill out, or I can put it all into this new thing that's called a transmitter, and let's see what happens. And all my folks said, come on, Pete, just do it. And that was most probably my first business risk, where I basically took all the money I had in the bank and I've spent it all in one go. And said, well, let's see, you know, how this works out. We were very lucky, because not long after I did that, we had an assignment to go back into Baghdad, actually. And we were on the roof of the Al Rashid Hotel with this correspondent called Peter Arnett, and the war broke out. And we basically started transmitting live pictures back to CNN in Atlanta. And it was the first time that war was being seen in the living room of people's homes, right?
So you had your satellites by this point, and you were transmitting those images back. You were the first one to submit those.
Yeah,
that is incredible.
The first company in the world who were doing these live pictures, and I had another one in Israel. So I personally was on the roof of the Sheraton Hotel in Tel Aviv in Herzliya in my chemical warfare suit, filming the Scud missiles coming in and landing all around us in the sea. And then we got arrested by the Israeli Defense Force, a really, really angry general. He came at gunpoint and he arrested us and took us into the basement. And he said, you guys should be shot at dawn for being spies. And we said, what do you mean? We're journalists. He said, no, you're not. You are an electronic forward observation post.
Oh, wow.
I said, what the hell is an electronic forward observation post? He said, who do you think is watching CNN in his nuclear bunker in Baghdad? Saddam Hussein. He's looking where his bombs are landing. He's picking up his phone to his artillery, and he's saying, left 100, up 300, on target, rapid fire. He said, you are responsible for killing people in Israel. So this was a big dilemma because, it's a democracy and it's business, and we were getting paid thousands of dollars a minute to do the transmission, and suddenly my business was about to collapse, and this whole live link that we'd spent millions on was going to go down, and we weren't going to do anything. So there was about a 3 or 4 hour debate in this basement, and we eventually came up with a solution. We said we'd film the Scud missiles in the sky, and we'd let them pass through the frame of the camera. We would show the point of impact after impact, and we would declare that this happened within the state of Israel. We wouldn't say if it was Jerusalem or Herzliya or Tel Aviv or where it was, so that nobody could use that intelligence to worsen the situation. But it was a lesson of journalism, business, human logic, instinct to keep people's lives alive, and all of that at like 29 years old, a responsibility,
huge responsibility.
And, we had people like calling us from America saying, the news saying, just do it. And we're saying, no, we can't do it. You have to do it. We can't do it. Why can't you do it? Because people are going to die, but you're not God. It's not your responsibility.
Right.
So, but we did the right thing. And we actually, at the end of the Gulf War, we had been responsible for really changing the way things were broadcast. And it was incredible.
I remember the impact that it had. And Pete, we've had some conversations about other parts of your business. So this is absolutely fascinating to me because I remember it like it was yesterday and how big of an event it was worldwide. Right. And the idea that you could be seen as someone that's helping the people bomb other people was just intriguing to me because CNN, started just a few decades before, but the idea of seeing live coverage and then the idea that it could be utilized for people to help redirect missiles is just amazing. But that's a huge responsibility, as you mentioned, at your late 20s.
Yeah, it wasn't much longer afterwards, maybe a year or so. I can't remember exactly. But I think it must have been 1992. And I think the Gulf War was like 1991. But anyway, 1992, I was in South Africa filming Nelson Mandela being sworn in to become the first black state president of South Africa. And we were in Johannesburg, and the gentleman came into our office and he gave me a VHS tape in those days. And he said, have a look at this. And I said, my goodness, what is that? And it was bodies floating down a river. Oh. And he said, this is a massacre going on in Rwanda. And I said, whoa, that's like radical, because I could see that there was no editing in the pictures and there were literally hundreds of bodies floating down this river and going everywhere. So I said, we'll be there in 2 days' time. And we basically chartered a plane and we went to Kinshasa, hopped in a helicopter, went across to a little border town called Goma, and we set up our satellite dish and our camera. And it was stranger than witchcraft to most of the locals, but we got the first pictures going out of these folks who were, been part of this massacre in Rwanda.
So,
which was terrible.
Pete, this is absolutely amazing. We'll get to the company that you're leading now, E2G Food. But walk us through, as you mentioned earlier, the business side. So a lot of people don't recognize that a lot of what they might see on a CNN or MSNBC or Fox News might come from an affiliate organization like yours. So you're out there on the ground filming and then sending pictures and video back to these entities that we know by brand name. Walk us through what that looks like. So you have partnerships with them, agreements, or do you send it to a central source like Reuters or some other place that packages it and then sends it from a contractual basis? How does that process work?
So what happened by that stage, we had bought the satellite in the sky.
Right.
So now we owned the ground, the crew, the equipment, the satellite dish, and we owned the space segment on Intelsat. And we transmitted our pictures to the satellite, and then we sold them by the minute to anybody who wanted to get them. So CNN were paying $1,200 a minute.
Wow.
NBC were doing the same. ABC were doing the same. ZDF in Germany were doing the same. And that was one of the difficulties I had as a young guy. We were invoicing $6-7 million a week from a big broadcast story.
Wow.
And one of the concerns going to bed was, am I making a huge lot of money out of somebody else's misery?
Right.
And how do I handle that? And I sort of came to terms that if we hadn't been there, the runway wouldn't have been extended, the Hercules wouldn't have landed, the tents and water and food in the world mobilization wouldn't have happened, and that was actually saving people's lives. So it was an interesting dilemma of doing well, doing good, and trying to put it all into perspective at a time that was pretty hectic, really.
When I think about it, though, the cost of entry today is different. People do not need to buy satellites on the ground or satellite space. They're having that same image transferred from their phones using a social media platform. What you were doing then is what many people do today from their cell phones. You were bringing information to the world.
Well, that's why I sold the company. I sold the company when I was 40 because I knew that technology was changing, that you would be able to send pictures on an iPhone rather than a $50,000 camera.
Right.
And I had 3 kids. There were 6, 8, and 10, and I'd done okay out of it. And that's when I actually sold the entire business. And I'd done it for I think about 12 years. And, did pretty well out of it. And then looked forward to the next chapter of my life.
So walk us through that next chapter. You went on and I think you got into telecom, and then you ventured into solar and a couple of other spaces, and then we'll get to the E2G.
Okay, so 2 things happened. One, I'd never been to university, and I felt a bit deprived of having never had a formal education.
So interesting. So you never went to undergrad?
Yeah, I never went to university.
Oh, wow.
Until I went straight from school to the army, because everywhere had to do army in South Africa, to becoming a cameraman. And then I built up a business that was generating over $300 million a year. And, I was the CEO and I sold it. So I'd never written a business plan in my life. I'd never taken out a loan because we didn't have any debt. So it was just, it was luck really, and hard work and good people around me. But then I decided to go to university, and somebody said, "Why don't you go to Harvard?" And I laughed. I said, "I'll never get to Harvard." And they said, "Just apply." And at that stage, I was living in Kenya, so I applied. I think they sent me, they accepted my application because they thought I was Kenyan. But I got in, and I spent 3 years doing a HBS, OPM, Owner-President Management course. It's like an executive MBA.
Right.
And that was fabulous. I loved it. I met so many amazing, interesting people. A lot of what I learned, I sort of thought, I know that. Yep, it was really fascinating to do that. But I think what it did for me was it opened my mind that you don't have to be too regional in any business that you want. You don't have to say, I come from this part of town, I have to do everything there, or I can only do this. It gave me the window of opportunity. An Australian guy said, "Hey, Pete, why don't we set up a satellite company in Australia?" So I said, we'll go 50-50. And we did that. We shook hands. And next thing I knew, we were selling satellite phones across the Australian outback with the Australian Post as our client. And then when I went back to Kenya, my wife said, "Pete, you better go back to work. You're boring. I married you for better, for worse, but not for lunch." So somebody invited me to go to South Sudan to meet John Garang, who was the leader of South Sudan at the time. And I thought, yeah, I'll take my camera and I'll go and interview him. Right. When I got there, he had no communications. He had nothing. I mean, he just had like an old VHF radio. And I said, "You need internet." And he said, "How do I do that?" I said, I'll bring a 40-foot container. We'll give you internet and dial tone. I tell you what, I'll give you USA internet because that's
interesting.
So, and
what year was that, by the way?
This is 2002 now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I basically, his eyes lit up and said, "How much will that cost?" I said, "I'll give it to you for free." He said, "Really? And how soon can I have it?" I said, "A couple of weeks." And I lied because it took me 4 weeks to get a 40-foot container. I had to drive it on a truck all the way through the bush, like for a week, until I got to his camp in South Sudan. And then we didn't know how to get it off the truck, so we put big cables on and tied it to a tree and drove the truck. But everything worked afterwards. And he loved it. He got his first John Garang at yahoo.com. And then everybody started phoning, and this thing it was called the Happy Box in the bush. And he said, "Now I want one in all the towns, and I don't want to have to go somewhere. I want to walk and talk." I said, "Well, that's called a mobile phone business." I said, "Build a mobile phone." I said, "I need a license." He said, "You got it." And I said, "No, I don't want just to be given it. I want to be in business with you. So you put some money in, I'll put some money in." He said, "How much money do you want?" I said, "Put in $2 million. He said, I'm a rebel leader. I don't put money in." So I said, if you want to be a business partner in a mobile phone company, you better start thinking about it. Anyway, he put $2 million into the business, and I think I'm the first person in the history of getting $2 million out of the SPLM. And we set up the network of the world, a mobile phone network. And I was under a huge amount of pressure because there was a comprehensive peace agreement going on between the North and the South. And we had Americans like DynCorp, and we had all these organizations coming in trying to influence the signature of the peace treaty, but they wouldn't sign it until the mobile phone network was working, because they wanted to have a network in the South. So anyway, we got it up and running, and that was my first venture into mobile phone networks.
That is incredible. You hooked up this device to a tree and just drove the truck away, and it landed without damage.
Well, we put car tires and stuff underneath. Sure. We took all the computers out and all the equipment, so it was just a big metal shell. But it did land in the dust in the desert with a big plume of dust going everywhere. But, I mean, it was honestly, when we put the phone into Rumbek, was the town, we got the eldest man in the village to come and bless this phone. And he had never heard a phone ring in his life. And, he was an elder, and he was quite spiritual, and he was blessing it and shouting his prayers. And then we gave him the phone and said, "Do you want to call anybody?" And he said, "My son in Canada, we hadn't spoken to for like 8 years because of the war." And his other son happened to be there and dialed his number in Montreal, which was in the middle of the night for him. But his son answered the phone, and he picked up the phone, and he couldn't believe it. He could speak to his son he hadn't spoken to for 8 years, and he kept shouting, "Can you believe it? I'm in Rumbek, over." He kept saying,
"That's amazing."
And the tears are just pouring down his face. And this man just couldn't believe it. It was just the most incredible thing. So when he gave me back the phone, I said, "Just keep it. You can have it. You can have free calls as often as you want."
Oh, wow.
Use the network. So that changed his life. He was suddenly able to talk, as he said, to afar.
That's amazing.
That changed his life, yeah.
When I look at it, and we'll move on in a second because I know we're near the end of our time, but when you think about the idea of a mobile phone and social media, essentially democratizing the world in some ways, it's just amazing how it can bring people together.
Well, it not only brings it together, it creates business opportunities. That dusty little town within 2 weeks had 10 more stores, cars were coming in. The one guy who was selling my airtime, who started off walking, suddenly had a bicycle, then he had a motorbike, then he had 15 guys reselling for him. So the ability of communications to drive business was profound, and we saw it, in front of us. It was amazing.
That's cool. So your first business was $300 million. Your other businesses were how big?
So the mobile phone business, I lost a couple of million on. Because that didn't work, and I sold out too soon, and it was too political, and the Chinese came in and stole it. So I lost some money there. And then the next one was solar energy in Poland, and then others was spirulina. Look, for me, it's not about the money; it's more about the adventure and the excitement of doing well. I try and make more than I lose, but ultimately nowadays it's more about the impact. What can you do with what you've learned, the people you've met, and how can we make the world a slightly better place as a result of that?
And that's incredible. What I've learned just in our conversation is that, again, like at the beginning of our conversation, you're running towards something, whether it's towards harm because you've got to do a job, or running towards giving an opportunity to someone else from a business perspective, or a phone to someone who hadn't spoken to his son in 8 years. That is immeasurable. What a great heart you have for trying to be at the cutting edge, either of innovation or giving or entrepreneurialism. It's amazing what you've done. Now, quick question for you before we speak about E2G. So you were an accomplished business leader. You built a company that was several $1 million. Why did you feel like you needed a degree?
I think because I'd watched too many American movies and saw how much fun they have in frack houses. I think it was the social adventure more than education. And, I've got a very inquiring mind. I know that I learn from other people very well. And I just thought the idea of going to an American university would be fascinating, and I'd meet some interesting people. And in fact, while I was there, I said to 18 people from all over the world, let's get together once a year in a different continent and learn from each other.
Right.
So that's what we did. We traveled the world and we learned from one another and became, business mates and friends. And so I think that was the main reason. Also, I wanted to go to the Harvard Club in New York and not have to pay to get in.
So, Pete, I've got this little device here. that you brought all the way from Texas to give to me. So tell us what E2G Food is and what took you to this venture.
So when I was in South Sudan filming a World Food Program, Hercules, offloading bags of grain, these 25 kilograms, if it didn't land on your head and kill you, when you picked it up, you had to find water, you had to cut down a tree, make a fire, you'd all get together, you'd eat it, and it would be full of carbohydrates, so you'd go to bed, full, but you'd wake up hungry. And I just thought, God, that's just a nutty way to feed people. It's not the future. It's not the best way to do it. And I thought that there has to be a better way. And it was only when I invested in Poland in the spirulina farm that I suddenly realized the superfood, the spirulina green powder, which is so good for you, and it's a full-on protein. I said, that's it. If we put that into a food bar and we dropped those out of the back of a plane, so just to give you an idea, that's an iPhone.
Nice.
That's the size of it.
Oh, wow.
And it's 500 calories, 30 grams of protein. It's made from dates and oats and spirulina and chia seed and minerals and vitamins. It's most probably the healthiest thing you'll ever eat in terms of sustenance if you're displaced. So that's pretty much, I thought about the mother with 2 screaming kids who were hungry because they were displaced from either a hurricane, a flood, or a war, or whatever reason has made them get them into that situation, and how miserable it is if you've got hungry kids around you. And then I started exploring a bit more, and I realized that 850 million people who go to bed hungry every night.
Right.
There's like 200,000 in New York, for example. So there's a huge market, and I thought, well, if I can somehow try and tap into that market and make a difference somehow, but it had to be a social enterprise. It wasn't about just giving away all my money, which would run out quite quickly. It had to create a business that allows you to make an impact and stay in business, but continue to make an impact for a long time. So that's how the EAT. Well, first of all, I'll quickly just tell you how I got the name Food.
Okay.
Was I put it out on my Harvard group. I said, mate, I've got this protein bar. What should I call it? And everybody came up with all these names. And an Australian woman called Anna Shepherd said, just call it Food. I said, can't call it Food.
Right.
She said, well, that's it. It's no nonsense food, right? She said, I Googled on ChatGPT and I saw that the 5 words used mostly in a refugee camp were like, okay, blankets, food and water and something else. And it said food's like right up there, just food. So I thought, well, why don't I be audacious and outrageous and decide, well, I'm going to be food. And then we got the E2G, which was Eat to Give and to Grow, because a big part of it is Eat to Give, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So we got to eat.
So here's what I want to do. And I didn't expect to talk about your ventures around the entire globe, running into bombs and recording those and sending them back to the U.S. to share with the whole world. That was absolutely amazing. So what I want to do is have you back on the program soon. And let's spend the entire program discussing E2G Food, because what you're doing in that program and with that business is amazing. There's a thing called social investment or impact investing. And you've created a business that also has a purpose and a good for the world. So I want to spend the entire program discussing that and what's next for your product and your program and how you're expanding around the world. So let's do that. For this specific show, I want to end with you giving maybe 1 or 2 business tips. I've taken a lot just from listening to you, but if you had to sum up a business decoded advice and tip for the person listening, what would that be? Very spontaneously, without having thought about it, follow your instinct. If you can dream it, you can most probably do it. Nice. So look at it with an intelligent hat on your head and just think, is this thing possible? And if there's a good chance that it might work, I would just try and do it. Just see how it goes, and really surround yourself with better people than yourself. If somebody knows more than you do, grab them and just say, come and help me, because I think this is a great idea, but let's try and do it together. So surround yourself with smart people. You have to follow your passion. Go for a business that you're intrigued in and wish to be in and love and want to do every day. And then
try and make the basic economics work. Try and make more money than you spend. And then if you get anything out of after that,
right.
So it's probably going to be a successful business.
I love it. I'd encourage anyone listening to this specific program to rewind and play it at least a few times and listen to that young man in his 20s that decided to buy a camera that cost as much as a home and made a business out of it that turned into a $300 million business. So, Pete Henderson, I appreciate you joining us on Business Decoded. I look forward to having you next time.
It's a real pleasure, and thank you for having me. I look forward to it.
Thank you for joining us, Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.